Is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand.
Can I welcome members, officers and the public to today's meeting of the Transport Committee. Our main item of business today is a discussion on autonomous passenger vehicles in London. Getting some feedback. We've gone? Excellent. So our main item of business is a discussion on autonomous passenger vehicles in London. Please can everyone make sure that your electronic devices are switched off or to silent mode? And can I also ask guests and members to position their microphones so that you can be heard clearly? Can I start by asking our clerk, Hannah Barlow, if any apologies have been received?
No apologies received, Chair.
Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Yep. Yes? Noted. Yes, I'm noting no extra declarations. Excellent. Can we also note the committee's membership, chairing arrangements and terms of reference, and the standing delegations of authority to me as chair, as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 11th of May 2026? And can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of March 2026 to be signed by me as a correct record? Excellent. Can I ask the committee to note the completed, closed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings and the additional correspondence sent and received? Excellent. And can I ask the committee to note the actions taken by the former chair under delegated authority in consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the committee's letter to the Secretary of State for Transport responding to the DfT's consultation on local transport authorities and the licensing of taxis and private hire vehicles, the committee's letters to the TfL Commissioner and the Home Secretary regarding assaults on transport workers in London. Thank you. And can I also ask the committee to note the responses from TfL's Chief Customer and Strategy Officer to our report on accessibility and inclusion in transport planning, the Secretary of State for Transport to our letter responding to the DfT's consultation on local transport authorities and the licensing of taxis and private hire vehicles, and the Minister of State for Rail and the TfL Commissioner to our letters on assaults on transport workers in London. All noted. Excellent. So we now move on to our main item of business, which is a discussion on autonomous passenger vehicles in London. And I'd like to welcome to the chamber our guests. We have Dr. Nick Reed, who is the founder of Reed Mobility and member of the DfT's Science Advisory Council. Welcome. Thomas Abelman, who is host of the Freewheeling podcast and a former Director of Strategy and Innovation at TfL. Professor Jack Stilgoe, Professor of Science and Technology Policy at University College London, and Professor Glenn Lyons, Mott MacDonald Professor of Future Mobility at UWE Bristol. So welcome to all four of you. And I will now swap to my other papers and we will get started with our first question, which is for Jack and Thomas. If autonomous passenger vehicles are introduced in London this year, what would this mean for the safety of people using London's road network? Jack, do you want to go first?
First go at that. Thank you very much. So what would it mean? I mean, the social scientists' answer will always be it depends. It depends in what circumstances the technology is introduced. It depends on the scale. It depends who is doing them. It depends on, crucially, the rules that wrap around the experiment as it scales up, so that the experiment can be managed responsibly, so that we can learn from small mishaps when they happen in order to prevent larger mishaps from happening later. I mean, in terms of questions framed in terms of what will the technology mean, I would encourage the committee, I'd encourage any policymakers actually, rather than thinking about what can the technology do for us, think about what can we do for the technology, right? What rules should we be setting in place such that we can make the technology go in better directions? There is nothing inevitable in this area. Even a technology that looks like it's been developing in other cities in the world will look very different in different cities, simply because transport systems always look different in different places.
Thank you. And yes, I think that question about what are the rules and the framing around this that London can put in place to make it work in London is absolutely fundamental to this investigation that we're kicking off this morning. So really helpful answer. Yes, Thomas, did you want to come in on that?
Of all the things that I'm worried about when it comes to autonomous vehicles, and there are many, safety is actually comparatively low on my list, other almost than as a distraction. The firms that are developing this are pretty cautious. They don't want them to hit people. They are comparatively unlikely to hit people. They generally don't. They will sometimes, but so do all vehicles. I'm sure we'll get into this later in the conversation. I think the worry I have is almost that because our starting question is always, are these safe? We therefore move away from the question of, are they useful? What do we want from these? The danger is we're a bit like someone who goes into Currys and looks at the appliances and says, are they safe and do they work? And you end up buying an air fryer to do your printing. That's not the most important set of questions. The most important set of questions is, does this thing do what I want it to do for what I'm trying to achieve?
And what do you think this thing wants to do?
Well, what we want to do in the world, I mean, the exam question for transport is always the same one, which is how do you connect as many people as possible to as much opportunity as possible with the limited downsides. So, downsides around safety, downsides around pollution, downsides around the use of the space, and downsides around cost. And the question, therefore, is, A, can autonomous vehicles enable us to connect more people to more opportunity with fewer of all of those downsides? And the second question is, can this model, as in the robotaxi model being promoted by Waymo and Beidou and all of the others, is that the right way to do it? And my starting point would be, yes, this technology can enable us to do that, and no, this model is not a particularly helpful or efficient way of doing so. And because the Waymo and Beidou and all the others have come to us with a robotaxi model, doesn't mean that we have to assume a robotaxi model is the model for autonomous vehicles. There's a danger that they're conflating the two. But if we imagine, for sake of argument, that we were talking about introducing petrol vehicles to London, and the only model that was available was a private hire cab, an Uber, we would be missing an awful lot of potential form factors if we didn't say, well, actually, could we make one really big and put lots of people in it and have regular stops and create a regulatory regime that required local authorities to have those stops and invent the bus network? And if you look at, in London we did, and we created a bus network, and there's a bus stop within 400 metres of everyone's home. In Abu Dhabi, they adopted multi-lane highways and no public transport. Very different models for how you can use petrol vehicles. So the conversation we need to be having is, what is the model by which autonomous vehicles can enable us to connect as many people as possible to as much opportunity as possible with the fewest downsides?
Excellent question. Nick?
Just to respond on the specifics, really, of safety, the only evidence we can look at the moment is the evidence that Waymo has from the deployments they've had in US cities. And they've gone as far as anyone, really, in trying to publish the safety performance of their vehicles. And they're seeing between an 80 and 90% reduction in serious crashes in the cities where they're operating, compared to human drivers completing the same types of journeys. So as far as possible, they've tried to do an apples-to-apples comparison of seeing those big reductions. Two caveats to that. As Jack said, London is very different to US cities, and UK roads in general are much safer than American roads. So we have to be careful about those kind of comparisons. And then the second point is the types of incident that automated vehicles have might be very different to the types of incident that human drivers have. And so they will get a lot more media coverage. They'll be a lot more prominent in people's minds. And so there could be a more negative reaction to those types of incident.
I rather feel you've covered the territory very well. I suppose one of my concerns is that we are at risk of myopically being focused on the safety of this machine in terms of its immediate interaction with other road users, rather than necessarily zooming out and considering the indirect safety implications. Or indeed not just safety in the sense that a collision has occurred, but the imposition of greater levels of anxiety or concern on vulnerable road users. So if I imagine myself being a cyclist, I'm now navigating human-driven vehicles and machine-driven vehicles, and that may or may not be having adverse effects on my willingness to remain a cyclist. And if I stop cycling, and move into a different mode, then that has other implications. So I think one of the frustrations I have overall, and it's interesting that Thomas highlights he's not particularly concerned by the safety question, and yet that's where the providers of these services would like our attention focused, which I think is starting to tell us something about the lack of transparency in all of this.
Sorry. We obviously in London have all Transport for London's work is governed by the Mayor's transport strategy, which has very clear objectives to ensure that 80% of trips are made by walking, cycling and public transport by 2041, Vision Zero by 2041. And there's a Healthy Streets model, which again is all about ensuring that people walk, cycle and catch the bus for their local journeys. One of the things that's sort of gone unsaid in all your answers is, do you think that there is a role for this technology in public transport?
Absolutely, there could be. Obviously, it's still very early days, but a bit, as like I said, with the Abu Dhabi versus London, this is this is a technology which has the potential for very broad application. So we should be looking at that. There's a number of things would have to be true. The cost would have to fall significantly, because at the moment these vehicles are still very expensive, and we would, as with the robotaxi model, we would need to prove out that they do work. But if you look at, for example, what's happening in Oslo, where Ruter, the public transport authority for Oslo, has the largest experiment for public transport-based autonomous vehicles in Europe at the moment. They are using small autonomous vehicles as a test to plug into the transport network in low-density suburbs. Now, that's exactly where the Mayor's transport strategy most needs help. We're trying to achieve 80% mode share by public transport and active travel. In outer London, where you have lower density suburbs, it's currently about 58%. There are 4 boroughs where it's below 50%. Those are all the boroughs with low housing density and comparatively limited public transport. And we're not about to build vast numbers of new tube lines, whereas small autonomous shuttles that connect to hubs, that might be an interesting model. Now, they have currently got vehicles on test. I've travelled in one in Oslo. As with all, they're currently using safety drivers. They have estimated that in Oslo, it would take 30,000 autonomous vehicles as part of this service to eliminate all private car use in Oslo. Now, obviously, London is bigger than Oslo, and it is highly unlikely that will ever happen. But the point is, it shows you can achieve the Mayor's transport strategy, and this can make a valuable contribution to it. They are currently very, 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 very high level, but estimates you could get, if the cost falls appropriately, you could get the cost down to about £1 a mile, which is a credible public transport cost. What's crucial about this? One, this is an absolutely integral part of the public transport network. These autonomous vehicles they carry the Ruter livery, they carry the Ruter logo, they are utterly embedded in the public transport system, defined by Ruter, booked on the Ruter app. And I think there is no requirement that autonomous vehicles need to be delivered by a private company operating commercially to its own interest. They can be operated by and for a public service in the public sector as part of a fully integrated transport network.
Thank you very much. I'm going to now move to Assembly Member Garrett, who's an Outer London Assembly Member.
Yes. Sticking with the safety thing that we're supposed to not be sticking with, I'm interested. I think there are elements of that, but let's call it sort of wider safety performance that we haven't really touched on. So some of the edge cases, if you like. So it's very easy to get, the Pareto principle, it's very easy to get an autonomous vehicle that works most of the time. It's very difficult to get an autonomous vehicle that works all of the time. So you get, things like unusual roadworks, or you get, police or a marshal or something at an event that it's not sure how it's going to do. You get sabotage attempts where people like stick a traffic cone on the bonnet. You get, a situation where it just freezes. It can't decide a safe way forward, so that it correctly, but unhelpfully in some cases, freezes and stops, because that's better than moving forward and crashing into something. But then you get, potentially bunches of these things stopping. So I'm interested in that, which I think also falls into this sort of safety performance and, teleoperators and how they get involved. What are the right questions you think we should be asking about that aspect of the performance of these vehicles? How they perform, not just in the easy 90-odd%, but let's say the difficult 2 or 3%, where either there's a safety implication, or in order to avoid a safety implication, there's then a sort of weird road behavior implication. I don't know. Yeah, Nick.
Yeah, those are great questions, and you should be asking them of the companies that are looking to deploy. I think the way to look at it is how often do those things occur, and is that at an acceptable level for the Committee for Transport for London, for residents? Actually, are they, and users of the road network, are they? Will they accept that the vehicles do that from time to time, acknowledging that human drivers do make those kind of mistakes from time to time as well? I think the remote operation aspect is really important. And again, how often do the remote operators need to intervene? How effective are they intervening? What constraints are there on how well they can interact with the vehicle when their assistance is required? And a really important point, and I know it's something that companies are very keen to resolve, is the interaction with emergency responders, so police, fire, ambulance. How does that process take place? How do the vehicles recognise that emergency presence? How do they then fulfil their responsibilities for that interaction when emergency responders are present?
Thanks. Yeah, I was going to say an obvious complication. There's an area about less than a mile from my house, actually, which is a really built-up area but has zero phone signal. If I'm listening to a podcast, for example, on my way back from the station on the bus, there's about a minute where it will just stop, even though it has buffered up to that point. And so if there's a problem on that road, it's quite a main road, there are buses operating on it, presumably teleoperators can't connect. I don't know whether you have examples of that kind of problem. Jack?
Yeah, just on that, on the teleoperation thing, I would say, as far as I understand it, this is why Waymo have insisted that what they do is not remote control in the sense, because that would require a hard connection to enable them to do that, but what they do is sort of remote operation in which they are able to intervene to tell their vehicle to do certain things, which doesn't require the same strength of connection. But I think it tells us something really important, as do the questions of those edge cases and near misses, which is about the danger of just letting companies mark their own homework. So Waymo have been very good at publishing a lot of their safety data, but it's their safety data, right, which is not the same thing as an independent evaluation of the technology. Yes, humans make mistakes all the time. They get involved in unpredictable situations all the time. But the opportunity with automated transport is that we can understand those things and learn from them, and not just one vehicle learns from them, but the entire fleets can learn from those edge cases. I would argue that learning needs to be social, not just privatized to a particular operator. So I think things like asking companies to share their data on near misses and edge cases becomes absolutely crucial here, because otherwise there's a danger of either other operators or companies themselves repeating some of those mistakes. So it's not just the safety in the moment, it's about designing systems of, well, I would refer to them as social learning. It's what we see within air transport, for example. It's the reason why air transport has become so much safer over the decades, is that when something happens, everybody is forced to share data and everybody is forced to learn from those mistakes.
I was going to ask actually about, so what is the kind of data that we need? And it's interesting you've given the example of aviation, because obviously there's the black box And I assume the data that's the telemetry data that's recording is actually published, so all Boeing and Airbus and everyone would have access to whatever aeroplane it was, and that's the kind of model you have in mind, is it?
Yeah, and there have been arguments for what have been called ethical black boxes within various forms of automated transport, and Nick has worked on some of the other ones. One other point, just on teleoperators, so I think it's worth noting as well that Waymo have got into trouble recently with the US Congress for not being completely transparent about their use of teleoperators. It's one of those, one of these areas, there's a bit of sort of Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain type stuff going on here, right? That they don't want to talk about what's going on behind the scenes because it slightly spoils the magic, but actually understanding what actually makes the technology work, including the people behind the scenes, is crucial to policy making good decisions about the technology.
Thanks. Glenn.
Yes, what's intriguing me here is how readily we're drawn to a conversation which is seemingly trying to help Waymo provide a solution looking for a problem that's safe enough for London. Now, to some extent, of course, there's no point me trying to close the stable door if the horse has bolted, but it hasn't yet in London. And I think my concern is we have the Mayor's vision, and it's great that London is vision-led. And as we know, with Better Connected in terms of England as a whole, there's much greater emphasis now, or intention for the future, on going upstream in the appraisal process and much earlier on focusing on optioneering, asking what's the problem we're looking to address here, and then considering what solution options do we have. And it feels a little bit as though London has a gun to its head in that, well, we don't need to worry about doing the appraisal. We're simply giving you the only option available to address. We're not going to quite tell you what, but you're going to be drawn to thinking it's safety. And that, to me, seems very concerning, that it should be much more black and white, that if you're wanting to come into this city, you need to have your act finally polished so that we don't need to be worrying about safety implications. And certainly, as we've seen in other US cities, the playground effect being that city authorities, municipalities are having to devote their time to cleaning up some of the edge case messes that are occurring.
To be fair, I thought the thrust of my question was, how does this work, and does it work as well as they claim, rather than to be fair, we do have a gun to our head to some extent. It's the Department for Transport who's licensing it, and London just has to accept. And also the Department for Transport declined to attend our meeting. The other question I think you maybe touched on earlier, Thomas, was about safety. There's a lot made on how these compare with a human, and that's American data. Is there UK-based data? Because I think you mentioned, UK roads are much safer. So if they're comparing American human drivers to robot drivers, obviously that's not a like-for-like comparison with road safety levels in London or the UK generally.
It was actually Nick who made that point, but I will jump in.
Apologies,
because
sorry.
no, that's fine, because I think the point that Nick made is really important, which is there has been a lot made of various different 80s, 90% reductions in collisions and road deaths in the US. US streets look nothing like our streets, and London especially has put a huge amount of effort into street design to eliminate these collisions and deaths anyway. And therefore, probably, and I don't think we do know the answer to that question, Nick can correct me if I'm wrong, but probably the vast majority of the deaths and injuries that have been saved in the US have already been saved in London through complete multi-decade projects on the consecutive mayoralties and beyond of redesigning our streets.
Yeah, just
Apologies for misattributing, Nick.
That's all right. I suppose just to add to that, yeah, we don't know how the impact of AVs would play out on UK roads, or indeed London roads. What I would say is these vehicles will comply with speed limits, and we know non-compliance with speed limits is a factor in many of the collisions that happen. Similarly, these vehicles have 360-degree vision at all times, and that inability to see vulnerable road users because they're in the blind spot or whatever. That those are some of the reasons why serious crashes happen on London streets today. So there is a case to make that automated vehicles should help to reduce those types of incident. And there's also a potential effect of, like a ripple effect of these vehicles operating on streets. If they are compliant, following vehicles will also need to be compliant with speed limits, with the slight caveat that then if those vehicles get frustrated, they might adopt more risky behaviours in trying to overtake a vehicle that they perceive as being too compliant. So, that needs to be checked. But again, that's part of the monitoring data that you would want to make sure that these vehicles are having the effect that we anticipate them to have. And just to close, I think, the benefit could be so significant that I think it's critical in achieving that 80% reduction by 2041. I don't think it could happen without there being a role for automation in delivering those safety benefits.
Okay.
Let's just be clear for a minute, though. We do not need automated vehicles to have vehicles that comply with the speed limit. The e-scooters and the e-scooter trial operated by TfL all have technology that ensures they comply with the speed limit. Slightly weirdly, they're the only vehicles on London's roads that do. The most popular vehicle being bought now is a JQ SUV, which is extremely heavy and has a very, slightly alarming flat front, which will do a lot of harm to children. That does not comply with the speed limit. That could be changed. So we need to be really careful what we need this technology to do compared to what actually we don't, and what problems this technology can solve, for which we currently have no other solution, hence low-density suburb public transport.
Got you. Nick?
Sorry, and just to add to that, don't be persuaded that you need to have automated vehicles to achieve Vision Zero. That's part of the picture, but that shouldn't be an excuse to delay all of the other things that need to happen to improve road safety on London streets.
Understood. Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Bukhari, did you still want to come in
thank you.
on back?
Thank you so much. I just want to ask one very quick basic question, which sounds very basic, but I'm just interested. How many of you in the panel have actually recently been experienced the autonomous vehicles that have been doing trials recently? How many of you actually been in the car and done it? Yeah, so have you all done it? Yes? No. So no? Yes?
I've not recently been in a London Wave, but I have been in a London Wave, and I've been in an Oslo AV.
And yes. And out of the ones who said yes, did you feel safe?
I did, yes. I mean, the overriding experience of being in an autonomous vehicle is that it initially, the sensible reaction is to wonder why, and then to find it exceptionally boring, right?
I found it boring too.
Well,
That's
if it's exciting,
something
has gone very
because
badly
it was safe,
wrong.
but very boring.
I think the bigger issue, though, is I'm more worried, I have to say, about the people outside the vehicle experiencing the technology than the people inside it.
And you same, safe and boring. Okay, interesting. But do you want to come in?
Yes, and part of me thinks, oh gosh, you've found a fraud on the panel who hasn't been in one of these exciting vehicles. But dare I confess that I haven't been in a taxi or ride-hail vehicle in London for several years, because I find my experience in central London, at least, highly walkable, coupled with public transport. The last thing on my mind ever is to get into a cab.
Okay, well that's your personal position,
yes,
but it's not everyone's.
No, of course.
But, okay, that's interesting, because my perception when I went into it was that it was safe and it was boring. And I think that's an interesting position to I think, to get across as well, because I think a lot of the conversation is about the outside part of the whole conversation, isn't it? And I think, let's get that clarity and confirm it's not necessarily the safety of the person in the car, it's the safety of the people around the car. And Thomas, the question about public transport, I was really interested, because when I did do the experience, one of the questions I asked was about public transport. The technology's there already. It's not just taxis that we should be worried about being taken over, it's buses as well. Would you agree with that? And how long will it take for a bus to be part of this new wave of AI and autonomous vehicles?
So, in theory, it could be very soon. So, in Paris, RATP have a full-size bus operating autonomously now, live. Leuven recently introduced a new Route 16 with autonomous shuttles operating the service. The Leuven service has a sort of but captain on board, but they don't sit at the front of the bus. RATP are now operating their bus fully autonomously some of the time. I have to confess I'm not massively convinced that buses are a massively useful use case for this, in the sense that you will almost certainly want someone on board a vehicle with that number of passengers on board and that scale for all kinds of reasons. And sitting them at a little cab at the front and keeping an eye on the road is always probably going to be quite a sensible thing to do. The Victoria line, the Jubilee line, the Northern line, the Central line, and most of the Circle, Hammersmith City and District lines all operate autonomously now, but they have a driver at the front and we don't really notice or care. Therefore, I don't think it'll fundamentally change anything material if buses are autonomous as well. What is interesting is where, if you get the technology affordable enough that you can do public transport in places we can't currently afford, that it becomes interesting. And that's something that doesn't look so much like a large-scale bus with lots of passengers on board. It's a smaller, cheaper vehicle connecting those into each other.
I mean, if you were to make a prediction, a smaller bus that's autonomous, when do you think that could happen?
I mean,
It could happen now.
Yeah, it's a dangerous market to make predictions in. Elon Musk has been predicting everything next year for the last 15 years.
So we need to be ready.
But it absolutely... one of the things we talked about earlier was the edge case question. Now, I don't know how many nines you need on the end of the 99.99% accuracy, but I suspect for a relatively localised fixed route shuttle, you are 99.99% accuracy, not 99.9999% accuracy, which you need if you're trying to create, for example, a Tesla that can go anywhere in the entire country. The challenge we have is that the capital flows into the place where the market is. And currently the market is in robo-taxis and in Teslas. It's not going into public transport. And this is where we need leadership and where TfL has a real role to play in saying this is something we wish to do and creating a market, which TfL has a long history of being able to do.
Thank you. I know that there's some other panel, but it's up to you, Chair.
We're still on the first section, so I'm going to move us on. So we've got Thomas and also Bassam wanted to come in on this first batch of questions. So, Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Nick, if I just start with you, you mentioned about the fact that the vehicles can obey the speed limit. And can I ask how that happens? Can they read the signage, or are they programmed with what? Because I'm conscious that here in the UK, especially out when you get to outer London, particularly when you get to the more rural parts, you get roads that are on the national speed limit and roads that look like they should be a much lower speed limit than they are. So is it just, does it read its surroundings, or I just want a bit more information on how they actually tell what the speed limit should be?
It can be both. So it can be reading speed limits. So if there's a temporary speed limit, it will be reading that, but it would also have a digital representation of the road built in and then know that that particular road has a particular speed limit.
Okay, thank you for that. So the main question I wanted to ask was actually that last night I was rather surprised to receive an email from Uber telling me that they are bringing autonomous vehicles to London's roads, and I could tick a little box to see if I was interested. I'm still rather on the fence about them because whereas they sound cool and exciting, I've also seen Terminator. So I didn't click the box. But we've talked about some of the data when you was answering Assemblymember Garrett's questions. You mentioned again a lack of UK data that a lot of it's still making. So are London roads actually ready for Uber to bring these vehicles onto the road, given it does seem more imminent now than perhaps when we started this? And I'll go with whoever wants to go first.
I'll say that I don't think that's the right question. London's roads are defined by TfL's Healthy Streets model. That's what they are designed to achieve. And if anyone wants to operate vehicles on them, then they should be ready for London's roads.
So pushing back on that part, I mean, we touched upon this, that TfL currently license Uber, and there's a two-tier model, and they then have to then license the driver as well. But with autonomous vehicles, Uber will be licensed by TfL, but effectively the driver, the AI or whatever is driving the machine, won't be licensed by TfL. Doesn't that somewhat undermine our licensing arrangement as current? Apologies. I thought I checked and not seeing it, so my apologies for that. I'll withdraw that question then.
I'm going to move us on road safety to...
Sorry, if I could just ask one more question on road safety that is not a... later. I just moved on.
Tight, quick, and
so it was on something Jack said on this, which you mentioned at the moment about the impact on road safety. At the moment, the way we look at road safety, it's very reactive in the UK because things like near misses that you mentioned aren't actually recorded at the moment because they're very subjective when you get. With autonomous drivers, so it does feel with road safety a bit like we almost wait in this country for a certain amount of deaths to be achieved before we intervene. So on a positive, would you say that this actually presents an opportunity to correct that in how we go about dealing with road safety if we have more objective data being gathered from autonomous vehicles?
I'd certainly say it's an opportunity. Yeah, it's an opportunity that comes from the data, from the learning that happens all the time. It's in order to take that opportunity, policymakers need to intervene so that the data isn't entirely privatised.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you. I guess we could put headrest screens on the back for Assembly Member Bakari's journeys going forward to make them more interesting for you. Just at the moment, there's a competent and careful driver standard, which is said to be too vague. Do you think the government now needs to define a clearer, measurable safety threshold that would be implemented as part of the regulations?
Yes. So I've been doing some work on this and talking to members of the public about what careful and competent means to them. Their standard is high. They have high expectations for how vehicles should behave in accordance with that careful and competent standard. They also have expectations about data sharing when incidents happen, as Jack has described, that if you can share data that would prevent other vehicles from having such crashes in future, yes, you should be sharing it. It's sort of obvious to people, although it's something that has been a challenge from the regulatory regime. So, yes, there is work ongoing to define what careful and competent means and how that plays out as vehicles get deployed.
Can I add that we do have some quite good survey data on standards of acceptable risk what the public think would be acceptable in this space. And yeah, as Nick says, the public understandably want to see a high bar. You know, the sort of political test might be when one of these things is involved in an incident and the Secretary of State is asked by a journalist, how many deaths are you willing to accept? You know, what reference points the public are likely to have. You know, Elon Musk has said, oh, well, if the thing is safer on average than the average number of road deaths per year, then we should endorse the technology. But when it comes to trains or planes, we have maybe as much as 100 times higher expectations of safety for those modes of transport, right? And just telling the public that they are too risk averse in those areas, right, won't wash. We don't yet know, right, because we haven't seen that number of incidents. But what we do know of public attitudes is that people will have very, very high standards indeed.
I mean, just to use an analogy, Elon Musk is now saying that the primary purpose of Tesla is autonomous humanoid robots. If we said that a humanoid robot was no more dangerous than the average human, no one would be happy with that. You know, don't worry, it is not more likely to punch you than anyone else in the street you come across. We would not be satisfied. And it is very clear from, you know, we have defined weightings of the number of deaths and serious injuries that we're willing to invest to avoid in different forms of transport. There is a very clear revealed preference human requirement that services become safer if they feel less control. When you're right up in the air and completely out of control, we have exceptionally high expectations of safety. In a moving train, you kind of feel like you've got a bit more control but haven't. As a passenger in a bus, you feel like you've got a bit more but haven't. Driving your own car, you feel like you have quite a lot. An autonomous vehicle is much more analogous to the lack of control you feel when in a train or a bus or a plane than driving your own car.
I mean, we've been talking about data and we've been talking about regulation. And in terms of setting the standards for London and the UK, would we be ahead of the game in terms of what we're setting as the standards that, you know, we don't necessarily see in any US cities? You've talked about effectively the sort of Morton's fork, right? The dilemma that will be faced by the data that sits in these vehicles is to make a decision in that incredibly difficult circumstance where you've got two bad options. Neither would be a positive outcome, but the vehicle has to make a decision, as any driver would in that circumstance. And so what transparency have you seen in terms of sort of the data that goes into the machinery that determines
coming
those?
to data in quite a bit of detail a bit later in the meeting. Sure. I think if you can focus really on the safety.
Yeah, so I mean, it's about that
point.
safety. So in terms of that, because the data we're asking about later is about the use of our data rather than the data that goes into the system to determine a road safety outcome. So here we're talking about road safety outcome, what is going in there, and go back to that shared data. It doesn't seem like that currently exists. What should we expect from these companies going forward?
Yeah, in the US, there's a standing general order. I can't remember the number, but it's easy to find, which is the format in which all companies operating AVs are required to submit data to indicate the safety of their vehicles. It's relatively simple. So it would give you incidents per million miles. It wouldn't give you vehicle made this decision in this situation and resulted in this outcome. I think we don't want a situation where regulators, road authorities have to adapt their processes to every different manufacturer of AV operators. We should be creating standards where companies submit their data and enable road authorities, national authorities, to understand whether those vehicles are achieving the careful and competent standard that we expect and is legally required.
Can I just add on that? So you mentioned, what the possibilities for London here. We are in a weird situation where in the US we now have thousands of vehicles with an accumulated driverless distance, millions of miles travelled, and yet we still don't know, weirdly, very much about them because there have been very few rules on that experiment that has been taking place on public roads. The real opportunity for London is to be the place that helps write those rules, right? To help say, actually, this is what a safe and useful rollout of the technology looks like, so that policymakers can make decisions about, well, what problems is this going to solve? Where should it be deployed? How should it be deployed? And all the rest of it. That hasn't been done in the US. It could be done in the UK. And DFT, to their credit, so, I mean, the government's Automated Vehicles Act does, was written with that opportunity in mind, and the secondary legislation that's followed is trying to set some of those precedents.
So effectively, there's no exemplar out there that we would say, look, that's the sort of holy grail of what to achieve. We'd be setting a bar here in London and the UK.
I mean, there are lots of things that we could learn from, right, including rules that exist for other forms of transport and what we already have in place, certainly in terms of the Mayor's transport strategy. But, yeah, London would be the place that applies those rules to automated transport.
Thank you. So we're now going to move on to our second batch of questions, which are looking at congestion and parking. So again, kind of relating very much to the Mayor's transport strategy objectives of reducing congestion and ensuring our streets work for walking, cycling, catching the bus, as well as for deliveries and people driving. So I'm going to move to Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you. And I'm going to be asking about traffic volumes and therefore congestion. And can I start with Thomas, because you earlier talked about some, I don't know, there's evidence from Oslo that it could actually reduce the total amount of vehicles on the road. But I know there's other concerns that it could actually increase the volumes. Do we actually know about the impact on congestion yet? And I'm particularly going to ask you a follow-up about how it might then impact public transport in London if we have increased or reduced congestion.
So I will really emphasise my earlier point that these are, autonomous vehicle technology is a multi-platform technology. And when we talk about it, we often talk about robotaxis because that's what we're being offered. There are alternatives, and the Oslo model is not a robotaxi model. I am nervous about the impact of robotaxis on the way that the London Transport Network works. we're trying to reduce the number of single occupancy vehicles. I'm not totally convinced that adding a whole fleet of zero occupancy vehicles is going to make London's transport network more efficient and effective. It is, best case, it's just adding another private hire fleet like Uber. That still means more vehicles on the road, unconstrained by the number of drivers that are available to drive them, which is currently the constraint on Uber's capacity. They will all take up space. It is very hard to visualise that that doesn't make London's road network less effective, which would delay buses, which would mean fewer people use buses and more people cause to drive, which creates a vicious circle that then makes the whole thing far less effective. Inevitably, Waymo, Wave, etc., will focus on the busiest places because that's where the highest demand is, because they're private operators. That's entirely legitimate and in their commercial interest to do, but it means that you'll see the greatest level of congestion in the places where people already wish to go and where there's already greatest demand. Whereas the Oslo model is focusing on the places which are worst connected to public transport, where there is already, therefore, comparatively less demand and less congestion, and then focusing on rail hubs into the existing metro and tram network that they have in Oslo. The city centre is already largely pedestrianised in Oslo anyway. They're one of the few places, also, by the way, that have, in various years, already achieved Vision Zero. There have been years this century so far where there were zero road deaths on the transport network in Oslo. So the starting question needs to be, what problems are we trying to solve? In London, we are trying to solve safety and we're trying to solve mode share, and we're always trying to increase access to opportunity. Does this provide that? Adding effectively another private hire fleet doesn't necessarily do that. Now, that's in itself not a reason to say no, because we allow private hire vehicles, and if they can meet our standards, then I don't think we should necessarily refuse them. But it also doesn't mean we should say that these are in any way useful or beneficial, and we then need to, start the work of defining the useful and beneficial proposition that actually achieves the things that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Nick.
And just a quick follow-up. Unlike a rideshare driver, the automated vehicles will be entirely constrained to where their technology allows them to go. So there is a much higher level of control over where those vehicles operate and who they serve and how they serve them. So it's not quite the same as unleashing a fleet of vehicles onto the entire network. It can be much more constrained.
Okay. We'll come to this later on, but I suppose that goes to whether TfL has sufficient control over any licensing application. Does anybody else want to talk about? Yes, Glenn.
I guess just the general point that Jack made very early on, which of course is it depends. It depends on the size of the additional fleet of vehicles that would be being introduced. It depends upon the amount of deadheading, as it's called, that's done in between actual rides taking place. It depends on the extent of induced demand, so the changes in behaviours of road users in London as a result of, in theory, an increasingly convenient form of mobility, possibly creating trips that didn't happen before, or of course abstracting trips from other modes. And therefore, I think that's what makes it such an unanswerable question at this stage. And it then depends to what extent London itself imposes a set of rules which attempts to guide the answer that it's looking for on congestion.
Thank you. Could I ask, apart from Oslo, is there any other examples worldwide where we do have any evidence about what the introduction of AVs mean for public transport?
There are a number of different projects taking place, especially in Europe. In America, Waymo have done things like providing credits for rail heading in. So they've made some initial attempts to form part of the public transport network, which is to be encouraged. In China, there have been huge deployments, but they've been primarily robotaxi deployments. Oslo is the largest, and therefore I would say the most advanced and the one we've got the most to learn from.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Assembly Member Prince coming in on congestion.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Thomas, I was interested in the point you made around the problems with adding to congestion in the central zone, being an outer London borough, many things. it would be interesting, wouldn't it, if the trial was in an area like Outer London, like Havering and Redbridge, where I represent, because there is a real issue with certain dynamics. So if you want to go from, say, Romford to anywhere, you can do that. But if you want to go from Upminster to somewhere else, that's a problem. So I could see a big benefit in doing a trial out in Outer London, because that's where we're never going to get to a situation where 80% of people walk or cycle, because they'll never get to where they want to go.
Yeah, I completely agree. My gold standard is that TfL show leadership, define what they want, and we have something that is fully integrated into the public transport network, Oslo style. And that there's multiple benefits of that, not least the fact that it can have a pricing structure that is designed around the public interest. But if we don't achieve that, then I would much rather see a robo-taxi style proposition in Outer London, designed to encourage rail heading into rail connections to form part of an overall mobility system. That is a lot better than a service that is entirely focused on the places where there's already the largest amount of demand for private hire and taxi vehicles, from the point of view of usefulness and outcomes.
Good, yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks. I'm variations on a theme in terms of traffic volumes and basically what these robotaxis might be doing when they arrive sort of fully fledged. So it seems to me that we've talked about like the potential for increased traffic volumes, and a lot of it obviously, and you've said this, it depends on the sort of model of how it arrives. And I did have a conversation with one of the operators where they were like, oh, it's going to reduce traffic because everything will be more efficient. It'll only do the volume, it'll only do the trips that are needed. And I was just like, in order to get your market share, you will flood London with robo-taxis. I was, speaking, but that, unless we have some clear, unless we have a vision and, some actually effective regulation, that is the worst case scenario as far as I can see. I was being a bit provocative, but they didn't actually have an answer. So do you have any, well, I'm sure you do, what thoughts do you have in terms of what interventions we need to make, both in sort of licensing and operating, that can try and stop the worst case scenario? And in fact also the Oslo example, where it's actually actively trying to link into public transport. How have they done that? What practical steps have Oslo gone, saying, well, this is how, and is that still possible with our legislation at the early stage it is? That's about 5 questions, apologies, but I think you know where I'm getting to.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of different things. The Act, in one sense, gives TfL a huge amount of leeway and power. Yes, there are certain things that are decided by central government. TfL actually will struggle to say the vehicle is not safe. But in terms of whether or not the licensing a particular operator's service is in the interests of London, TfL have a lot of ability to say, we want this, we don't want that, we do want that, we don't want that. The biggest challenge is the fact that they've only got 42 days to make the decision. And so I think what is really crucial is that as soon as possible, and maybe all this has been done internally, which would be fantastic, but even better if it was published, we have a really clear definition of what a good service looks like in terms of the outcomes it delivers towards the Mayor's transport strategy. And I think that would be really helpful to Waymo and Beidou and Wave as well, because then they know what good looks like and can work to achieve that. And that good looks like needs to, I mean, it's literally just what it says in the Mayor's transport strategy. There's no new thinking that needs to be done there. It just needs to be clear that it fulfills that. That actually means moving slightly away from conventional private hire thinking, because the private hire market is governed by a legislative framework that basically says you have to license. You don't have the option not to. In some ways, this Act gives TfL more leeway to make its own decisions as to what it wants and what expectations it has, and to define good by outcomes. Therefore, exactly as Assembly Member Prince said, if it is focused on Outer London, if, as Waymo have already done, it is, in other places, it is incentivising connections into the public transport network. There are various other things we may or may not come on to later in terms of security and safety and all that kind of thing. If all of those things are achieved, then yes, we will license it. Then, separately, there's your second question, which is moving away from, we're being given something, what do we actually want? And that's where Oslo started the question. They have their outcome that they're trying to achieve, which I really like, is the way they describe it. They describe it as sustainable freedom of movement. They're trying to achieve everyone can connect to everywhere else in Oslo sustainably. We use the 80% mode share target. I actually think theirs is slightly better because it's a human-centred vision. But how do you enable that? What does autonomous need to do to achieve that? They then said, OK, that's what we believe the proposition needs to be. It's outer Oslo-focused, low-density suburbs. It's a shuttle service. It connects to metro hubs. Then they procured that. They raised funding, some of which came from the EU. They procured that. They're testing it. They're actually also simultaneously running a separate trial with manually driven vehicles of a similar proposition, because it's easier to test the mobility proposition without also trying to test the technology. So they're testing the technology in one part of Oslo. They're testing the actual service proposition in another part of Oslo. The idea is then they bring that together. Now, the solution for Oslo will not be the same as the solution for London, because we're not the same place. But it's starting with that clarity of what do we need this to be, and then methodically working through and delivering that. Now, that, of course, means that TfL will need the funding to do that. That either needs to come from the mayor or central government, or a mixture of the two. It's unlikely in our case to come from the EU. This is not free, but it is also very useful. And I think one of my big concerns is that DfT have slightly bought into the idea that robo-taxis have economic value.
We will come to that as well. Yeah,
I won't say any more on that now then,
yeah.
except
Save yourself.
Except to say that actually us doing something distinctive probably has more economic value, as shown when TfL had global leadership in contactless. That was probably of more value both to London and UK economy than us simply doing what everyone else is already doing.
Thanks. Cheers.
Just a very basic level, coming back to your question around congestion and the earlier discussion about public transport. Most simply, it's about vehicle occupancy. And of course, as Thomas said earlier, this is about moving humans around London, not moving machines around London. And one of the challenges, I think, where we've seen in ride-hailing is at a very early stage, there was the concept of Uber Pool, where we were promised shared vehicles, and of course convenience has overtaken events, and it becomes much more attractive to be a single occupant in a ride-hailed vehicle. Now, that starts to open up a dimension to the conversation which is inherently more social and behavioural than technological, which is to what extent, if you now start referring to a robo-taxi as a very small bus, are 4 people prepared to share a journey in that very small bus without a driver? How comfortable are they interacting, given the safety and personal security concerns that we know are really quite rampant, not just in London, but more generally right now?
Yeah, thank you.
Just one final point, if I may, just on the numbers of vehicles, on scale. So it's been really notable that when cities were taken by surprise by ride-hail, right, it was because, in effect, you're creating a new market and then letting the demand and the venture capital funding model shape the speed with which that can grow. That is going to be different from for robo-taxis. You're right that there will be the same sorts of incentives to provide a service with that is adequate for people that want to call these things, which means you need a certain number of minimum cars within a certain distance. The difference is that a robo-taxi fleet can't avoid those questions of responsibility in the way that a ride-hail company would be able to, so that, when we've seen, for example, Waymo vehicles get into trouble, in San Francisco, often in quite mundane ways, it's definitely on Waymo. And I think that is going to mean that robo-taxi companies are going to be a bit more cautious in terms of how many cars they will want to roll out at a particular time, or maybe in particular places. So they might want to start small and get bigger. So we're likely to see different sort of dynamics, but I would say keeping an eye on and having some legislative levers to control the numbers of vehicles will absolutely be crucial to delivering a public interest service.
Yes, because I agree with you. There is a sort of it's much more visible, but that's somebody. It makes me quite nervous that we would just sort of see what happens and then have to rein it back in, as we've found that quite difficult in other areas if we don't have the right levers, as you say.
I think in one sense, I just want to agree with Jack, the numbers aren't going to be enormous straight away. And in one sense, I know it feels like this is speeding towards us and we've all got to react very quickly. In one sense, we have more time than we think, because one of the key characteristics of this technology at the moment is it's actually still very expensive. These are expensive vehicles, which means that the numbers that can be deployed is limited. It also means that at the moment the impact is relatively limited because they aren't cheaper to operate than a driven vehicle. So basically, from a price point of view, it's just more Ubers. Now, the opportunity and the threat all emerges if and when the cost of this technology falls significantly. If it falls significantly and we are tied into a robotaxi model, at which point it is economic to flood a city like London with unconstrained robotaxis, that is very bad for the city. Equally, if the cost falls and we have by that point defined a really clear outcome-focused public transport model that then is cost-effective to deploy into outer London, that is a fantastic outcome that could be utterly transformative to connectivity in outer London suburbs and for people who currently don't have access to either public transport or private mobility. We are nowhere near the cost getting to that level, so we have more time than we think to get this right.
Okay, thanks. That's really, really helpful. And just briefly, because I think this is pretty linked into what we've been talking about, is specifically about parking spaces, or because that's obviously our public space. There are roads, and the private companies using that to operate their model. Do you have any sense of what the impact might be in a similar way? Of are they going to be sort of maximum convenience sort of circulating around? Are they going to be parked up on each street corner? Is there anything sort of adding to what you've said about traffic volumes that we need to consider in terms of parking? Nope, that's fine. That's good. No, you have. Sorry, I looked down and then you were like, no, I haven't.
Anybody that makes predictions about parking, right, is probably trying to sell you something. Genuinely, it will depend upon the numbers of vehicles, right? But it's one of these, and again, the industry quite often like to talk about these potential second-order implications for how public space might be changed, right? There are a lot of things that we need to think about before we get to that sort of stage.
Is that okay? Yeah. Back to you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Oh, apologies. Sorry, I did that twice. I'm so ready not to talk about parking.
Don't think only about parking, but also charging infrastructure, because these vehicles will typically be electric. So charging infrastructure is important.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. OK, so we're now going to move on to look at accessibility and passenger safeguarding. And we're going to turn to Assembly Member Bakari.
So the research shows that 1 in 4 people aged 17 or above do not have a driving licence. 13% of people state that they don't drive because of disability. And there is also a massive issue with 63% of people with guide dogs who are often refused to access on a taxi and private hire vehicles. So are AVs good news for young people and for disabled people? Who'd like to answer that question?
I think I would just start, if it doesn't sound too glib, by saying, well, that's entirely separate to the automation of control of the vehicle. And we might level the very same question to, if I don't have a licence, do I have access to ride-hailing and black cabs in London in order to have physical and social mobility within the city? Very logically, once you take out the driver, aside from the the rules that the operator would provide in terms of support for people needing assistance in and out of the vehicle. A little bit like when we look at high-speed rail, we focus from station to station rather than from door to door. I think the challenge in terms of accessibility is very much that you now have a machine that has no physical means itself of assisting someone entering or leaving the vehicle or being in difficulty. It would require an alert and a sort of third party to become involved. So I think it's interesting that we're drawn to considering accessibility because of automation, which in actual fact is because someone else is providing a vehicle, whether or not it's manually or machine-driven.
Yeah, I mean, does anyone else have any concerns about this impacting? You mentioned, the taxi trade. I mean, that they are a lifeline for disabled people at the moment. And if we have automation, does that risk the black trade because of the fact that the disabled community could be using a different form of transport instead of black cabs?
I mean, as so often with this, the answers to this is probably all going to be, it depends. And this one, it definitely depends. I mean, my daughter is visually impaired, so will never be able to drive because she will not be allowed to take a driving test. So, in my most optimistic mode, I foresee a future in which the cost of these has fallen dramatically, and she is therefore able to use autonomous vehicles to get to places she would not otherwise be able to get to. Ideally, autonomous vehicles that are defined as part of a wider socially driven public transport network. That is potentially hugely exciting. As I said earlier, that absolutely depends on the cost falling significantly enough. Equally, if London streets are flooded such that congestion has increased and therefore both they and the buses are constantly caught in traffic jams and no one can get anywhere at all, then it will not be particularly useful for her or indeed for anyone else. So it really all comes back to what the model looks like. If the cost stays where they are at the moment, then it doesn't really change anything significantly for her because she could currently use Ubers to get everywhere if she could afford to, but probably can't.
Yeah, just to say, to date, the developers have tended to use regular cars to automate, and that's because they are an established platform. They're easy to get hold of, they're well made, they're familiar to people. As the technology is proven, and we should be pushing for these vehicles to be more accessible, rather than standard cars which aren't accessible to all in the same way other vehicles are. And there is a risk that visually impaired person taking a trip, if they cannot get door to door, as Glenn mentioned, it may be worse that they've had part of the journey. They might be kind of isolated, stuck at a location where they're not sure where they are, not sure how to get to their final destination. So because the automation can't go to the location that a human driver might do with the flexibility that they have. So just kind of caution over the extent to which AVs can achieve that sort of utopian vision of the end-to-end journey.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you want to come in?
So I just wanted to add really to what Thomas said, and if I take it to the limit of not just being affordable but free at the point of use, then I think it brings us into the territory of if something's free, then you are now the product. And it does raise a question while we're talking about the operating model for the service. It's, of course, the business model for the providers. And the question behind the scenes, I think, is what is really motivating them here. We've got multi-billion-dollar investment coming in. Is it really to create a viable taxi service in London, or is it about another type of data? Is there really going to be an interest in making it socially accessible, regardless of disposable income?
Yeah.
And that's where I think the challenge of we focus on the first order consequences when we're trying to examine what does this mean for London, but in actual fact, the second and third order consequences are typically more hidden, but could be more dramatic and potentially problematic.
I mean, one of the introductory videos that I've seen on this has been somebody who was blind and they used the service and the benefits of that. And we've been told, and I've asked questions of this, of Waymo and Wave, that they've engaged a lot with disabled communities, and I've asked them questions about what particular groups. I'm not sure if they've got the full coverage of engagement. From the research that you've done and the work that you've done, do you feel that the engagement has been adequate? And guys here know how I go on about this. Is it really proper engagement? Because I know a lot of disabled groups are talking about co-production. They're not seeing that approach in this particular issue as well. What do you think?
In my experience, only of Waymo, I think they are genuinely keen to engage as much as they can on this topic, with the limited bandwidth that they have available. But I think they would be very open to discussions with any group that had additional accessibility needs, to consider how their vehicles might be positioned to support those needs.
One thing I'd just add, I've recently been a participant in the RNIB Future Journeys project, which has been a project to try to reimagine how transport should work in the interests of primarily the visually impaired and blind, because it's run by RNIB Motability, but also other disabled groups as well. A very long series of multiple workshops involving many individuals with far greater levels of lived experience than me, who lives it vicariously through my daughter. And I think it's just worth highlighting in lots and lots and lots of debate and discussion and workshopping and flip charting and all the stuff, where that led to was not, we wish we had more autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of outcomes, and you can Google the Future Journeys project and watch the video that describes the outcome that group led to, but it was all about making the public transport network work differently for disabled people.
Can I just add one final point? Because you mentioned safeguarding. There is a tendency when it comes to questions of tech and automation for tech companies to imagine work in particular ways, and especially in this area, to think that a driver just does driving. And I think black cab drivers, bus drivers would say that their responsibilities go well beyond just driving, and including assistance of people with accessibility needs, but also public safety. And I think it's important to remember that role in any discussion about automating out drivers.
I think this particular issue is quite interesting, because Waymo originally were offering a trial with free service for disabled commuters. They've now added a $5 charge in the USA. There are risks in this, I can see, going forward. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I think that point about the driver responsibility going way beyond just driving is really, really crucial, and we should make sure we pick that up with Waymo and Wave when they come to see us. We are now moving to Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you very much. Just going to go back to your point, Nick, about retrofitting vehicles, obviously, at the moment. And in terms of accessibility, actually, obviously, if you're physically able, you can get in and out of the vehicle by yourself. There'll be other issues which I'll come to in a moment. But what accessibility standards should we be setting as part of this regulation and licensing going forward for the vehicles that we have at the moment? And when you do get other vehicles, larger vehicles that can be adaptable for somebody to perhaps get in a wheelchair and so on?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't require all private hire vehicles to be accessible, but we do for black cabs. And I think, it comes down to what do we want as society. I think we should be encouraging these companies to offer accessible services, and then the question is, to what level? Is there a if someone needs a wheelchair accessible vehicle, it should be available within a certain time limit, or a certain number of the fleet that is deployed should have wheelchair accessibility. So those kind of questions should be considered. I'm always slightly cautious about requiring the companies deploying these vehicles to have a bar that's set too high for them that we don't expect of the existing modes of transport. I think we should be encouraging the deployment of the vehicles. I think there are lots of benefits to them being deployed if managed correctly. we don't want to set the bar too high such that we don't get the other benefits that the vehicles offer.
I think I would just make the broader point about use cases here. And I can't help but think about the analogy with AI at the moment, where we have these large language models that are these huge sledgehammers that just smash down on everything, and they're very inefficient in terms of addressing specific use case problems, which more tailored solutions can. And I think, notwithstanding our earlier discussion around safety, if I were London looking at the situation I have and the problems I want to resolve, not only in terms of safety but accessibility and inclusion, I'd be asking myself, where are the use cases where I've got greatest problems that I need to make headway with? And I think partly that's to do with geography and journey purpose, and to do with the traveller type and their circumstances. So in fact, going back even to safety, have we seen these operators engaging with cities and asking, can we see the heat maps of your lag indicators of road safety in terms of collisions? Can we see your attempts to provide lead indicators on road safety? And we will target our service as an accompaniment to the existing mobility offer to try and mitigate those hot spots that are problematic, whereas instead, I suspect, but Nick may know otherwise, they're looking for the lower hanging fruit or the highest concentrations of commercially exploitable opportunity.
Really interesting point there, Glenn. And just on the accessibility, I mean, I guess one of the challenges that we've heard at the Transport Committee since I've been on it for the last, in terms of the last couple of years, particularly around accessibility, was actually some drivers, whether it's unconscious or conscious bias, discrimination, perhaps, if you've got perhaps a pet that you want to take with you, that sort of thing. I guess, in terms of it being an autonomous vehicle, you can't refuse taking the customer on the basis of visible or invisible issues or challenges that they face. With that, are there other things that we need to factor in terms of the move to autonomous vehicles from an accessibility point of view?
I think it comes in a similar bucket, but I think the comfort that some vulnerable passengers feel by using a vehicle where it becomes a private space for them, I think is a factor. And then neurodivergent passengers as well. The vehicle can be tailored to their preferences more easily. Through the profile that goes with them when they use the service. So yeah, there are some other factors that can support accessible transport as well.
I just think with every time we say the words autonomous vehicle, we just need to mentally run through what that would sound like if we said petrol vehicle. A petrol vehicle is everything from a lorry to a bus to a van to a taxi to a private car. The accessibility of a petrol vehicle entirely depends on the form factor, the purpose of the mode, how it's used, and it's exactly the same for autonomous vehicles. And the danger is that we drop into thinking autonomous vehicle means robo-taxi, and therefore every time we talk about it, we mean robo-taxi, which is one potential use case of autonomous vehicles, but only one.
I mean, I guess at the moment we're talking about that because that's the one that's going to be rolling out most immediately and currently on our streets, obviously being tested. So sticking with those, I guess, with robo-taxis and with the customer who would be sitting in the back, how well equipped are they to deal with? Right. So how well equipped are robo-taxis to deal with emergencies at the moment from a customer's perspective in terms of safeguarding them, making sure that they are supported, and in terms of if there was a health crisis, for example, if something happened in the back, is there monitoring that goes on to identify if somebody had a heart attack or stroke in the back of the vehicle, for example?
I was just going to say this is one of those areas where Waymo now has substantial experience of just operating the rather more mundane bits of a widely used service. In terms, and most of that customer interaction happens remotely via communication. So there are lots of people on hand to talk to the passenger at any one time. There are some questions of privacy there because Waymo would say in order to guarantee the safety of their customers, they need to be able to monitor what's going on inside the vehicle at all times. But I don't know if we know much more about Waymo's experience there as it's relevant for London. do we?
No, not much more. I think their experience is people don't feel uncomfortable with that level of monitoring. Certainly the behaviours they've seen suggest people feel perfectly at home in those vehicles for the most part.
So at the moment, obviously they're operating in the States. In terms of setting, again, the standard here in London and the UK, in terms of ability to be able to contact somebody in the case of an emergency, emergency buttons or whatever at the back of the vehicle, is there a good standard that's been set already, or is there information that we should be using in terms of shaping what that should look like?
I'm going to sound very speculative here, but when we come back to data, it would seem to me my starting point for this line of questioning would be, what do we know about existing human driver-based services in terms of the situations that passengers have faced and how those have been resolved, what response times and so on, to create a baseline, in fact, for what you'd then be asking Waymo and other providers to live up to. And I think it opens up a broader concern for me, which is when you look at the sorts of data that are being addressed by the providers in terms of understanding the overall consequences of this, I'm not sure we have enough questions set out for them that we expect them to be able to answer in an evidence-based way. So I think it's self-evident from this conversation that there are almost more questions than answers, and the questions keep coming. But I would very much encourage you as a group to be identifying, what are the top 10 questions that you would be expecting Waymo and other providers to be able to answer. So formulating that question around accessibility or difficulty of passengers would be one of those, I would say.
Yeah, and I'd say that there's a danger in framing them as autonomous, that they are these vehicles that just get sent out and forgotten about and no one is interacting with them. There's a whole chain of human interactions that are associated with their deployment, from checking them before they go out through to the monitoring and support of these vehicles once they're in use, and the questions around who those people are that do the remote support and how well trained they are and what knowledge they have of London and the specifics that might be required in terms of their interactions with the vehicle and with passengers. I think it's a good ground for questioning.
I'll just add, it's really important to understand the views of the emergency services here. What would they need in order to feel reassured on this? I know the police have been doing some really good thinking on this. There has been a lot of lessons from the US. They will be very different in the context of British policing and British cities.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, we've talked about it. You've said it in terms of making sure that, drivers are not just simply driving you from A to B. They're also engaging with you. They're, if something goes wrong, they're the first to identify it and to take action. So making sure that sort of alternative measures are in place in those vehicles is pretty key. One of the other things that we've seen in the US is deliberate vandalism of vehicles on the streets. Assemblymember Garrett referred to it earlier. If you were a passenger in the vehicle as that was happening, what safeguarding is currently in place in the States to deal with that sort of scenario, and what do we need to make sure is in place here?
I think the key part here is that these vehicles are festooned with sensors and recording equipment to be able to capture what's happened. Now, that's not necessarily particularly comforting to the individual within the vehicle that's being attacked at the time, but that there can be support to say, the emergency services have been called, they're on their way, that the vehicle can be instructed to, to take avoiding action and so on. I think that those kind of safeguards are in place. But yeah, it wouldn't be a comfortable experience to be that person.
Yeah, on the way in for the session this morning, one of the issues on my mind was simply the phrase dehumanising transport. And I think we get very utilitarian here in terms of, can we live up to the way in which currently you can cope with someone having a heart attack? Will the response time be okay? As if, as long as we can tick that box, it's all fine, the machine can do it. And again, I think we're not really able to allow our minds to move beyond that immediacy of the heart attack, to contemplating the more subtle social ripples that it go away from that and cause wider challenges for us ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good.
Thank you. And that looks like perfect timing for us to welcome to the chamber the children and teachers from Richard Albion Primary School from Barking and Dagenham. And we're talking this morning about some new kind of cars that are coming to London's streets that don't actually have anybody driving them. So they're cars that can drive themselves. And we've got lots of experts who are answering all of our questions. So I hope you find that interesting. I was actually going to just ask one further question about the passenger safeguarding, and I just wondered if there is any data from where these vehicles have been operating in America on assaults on passengers inside vehicles. So not the kind of people kind of trying to prevent the AV driving from working with a traffic cone on the bonnet, but actually two passengers and a physical assault in the vehicle. Is there any data on that?
Not that I'm aware of. I suspect there is data, but I don't know what that data shows.
Does anyone else have any ideas on that?
Other than that, I would hope, I mean, it's one of those things I would genuinely hope that Waymo are keeping on top of.
I'm not aware of any data either. I'm not aware of significant volumes of incidents. So if they have been happening, then I've missed them all. But I suspect this is one of those things. Most of the safety questions, I suspect, will pass very quickly. You know, as has already been said, these are vehicles that are intensively monitored. They have very large numbers of sensors. They have a high degree of automation. I suspect they will be safe for people both in them and outside them. And that we talked about boring earlier. I suspect, you know, a bit like 100 years ago, no one could envisage lifts without operators. And now no one does not get into a lift because there is no operator. You know, of all the various questions, I think if these things are useful, people will use them, and they will almost immediately cease to be something we think about. I think the challenge comes back to, who are they useful for, how are they useful, and do they achieve what we want to achieve as a city?
Thank you. Glenn?
In relation to this, I think I would be asking the providers, what data do you currently make available in terms of the established locations in US cities, and what data could you make available, and therefore, as a consequence, what data are you choosing not to make available, and why? I suspect, given the slight wave of silence across the panel to the question of assault in vehicles, the sorts of data that would exist would be anecdotal and not coming from the provider, which then raises the question, why are they not actively collecting that data? And there may be good reasons why they're not making it available, but that should be a conversation with the authority.
Thank you. We'll definitely take that forward. Yes.
Yeah, because I just wanted to, because this is something I'm really concerned about, because it's not really about the safety of the vehicles, it's about the effectively creation of a private space instead of public, you know, a much more public space in terms of transport. And it's actually, again, links in with the sort of dehumanisation of transport that you mentioned, that this is creating a space where, you know, potentially humans can behave badly with no one else to look at them. Do you know what I mean? And it does concern me that it's not, because again, I've asked one of the operators about this and it was another blank. It does really concern me that, again, it's not coming across your radar, considering that, you know, like violence against women and girls on public transport is a big issue for us and everything like that. So, yeah, I just wanted to sort of really pin that down, because I think it's important that it is on the radar, not just of us, but of everyone.
Glenn, did you want to come back?
I'd just like to raise the issue at this point of what's known as data exhaust. In other words, what data would one of these providers need in order to provide its service to the customer, as opposed to what additional data is it harvesting as a consequence of providing a service to the customer? And this includes, of course, the ability now to track as of course other modes can do, the movements in terms of origin and destination, but also
something we're just literally coming on to. Hold that point. So yes, we're moving on now to data management and cybersecurity, and Assembly Member Garrett.
I don't know whether anyone has any thoughts about this. As you say, there are several different categories of data, effectively. So there's the core data that's required to actually operate the vehicle, and then there's the associated data, whatever type of vehicle it was. There's the associated data to provide it as a taxi service as opposed to something else. And then there's what you might call all the accidental data that it picks up along the way. So as driving along the street, just like when I'm driving along the street, I can notice that people are around. Obviously, what I don't have is the ability to just store terabytes of data about who was where and when and what they were doing, and so on. So I suppose the question is about data. Firstly, what data operators are interested in and what they have and what happens to it. But I suppose particularly from the point of view of regulation and policy making, what data should we be trying to make sure that is captured or perhaps isn't captured, and what is shared and how it's made available. We spoke a bit earlier, for example, about black boxes so that you can analyse a crash from the point of view of what control inputs were happening, what kind of state the autonomous vehicles kind of AI thought the road was in and what decisions it made. What other kinds of data from a sort of policy making point of view in particular, I suppose, should we be wanting to make sure we have available?
I mean, these things are, first point, exceptionally data rich. We've already seen in the US a few sort of data controversies that I think open up some policy opportunities in quite interesting ways. I think one is the fact that these things are CCTVs on wheels, 360-degree CCTV on wheels. Police have understandably been intensely interested in a source of evidence. And the question of what the companies owe to the emergency services on that and the process for getting that data, I think, will be key. That's a sort of data exhaust question, less to do with the operation of the vehicles. In the operation of the vehicles, I think the question of what policymakers can delimit as safety critical data, with the public interest argument being, well, if safety is the aim, how can we all learn from what we see around us to improve safety on the roads? And that might be to improve the safety of robo-taxis, or it might be to improve the safety of other forms of transport. I think part of what's at stake there is not just crash data, but near-miss data. So asking companies to tell us not just when something goes wrong that's potentially embarrassing, that might be publicly visible, but all of those hidden things that might be extremely important to us to understand how to improve safety. And I think there's still a big opportunity there to expand the scope of what counts as safety critical data.
Yeah, so I think the terabytes of data that are recorded at the moment are primarily there to help the companies improve the driving capability of their vehicles. It's about learning and improving the way the vehicles perform. In terms of kind of the safety data that should be collected, there's a real challenge here because there's a massive asymmetry in the resources and capabilities and knowledge that the companies have versus that the regulators have, who are charged with assessing whether these vehicles are safe or not. And there are different ways in which the companies are going about the task of automating the vehicles. So some are using cameras only, some are using cameras and radars and LiDARs and different software approaches and so on. But I take it back to the knowledge that you need to have in order to operate a vehicle. You need to know what's going on around you, where you want to go, and what predictions you're making about how other actors in the scene might behave. And what we should be asking these companies is to provide us with their ability to extract that knowledge from their vehicles and show that they're operating safely, not just when crashes occur, not just when near misses occur, but all the time. Because these are vehicles that are they're machines. They don't have the human instincts of not wanting to hurt themselves, not wanting to hurt other people, not wanting to cause damage, not wanting to break the rules. We don't have an ability to know that a machine will follow those kind of ethical principles that every human has for the most part. So having data on how well those vehicles are doing in those basic tasks of, perceiving the world around them and making correct predictions and what to do next as a driver is going to be really important. But doing that in a way that's efficient and that makes it straightforward for the companies to provide that data in a format that can be analysed by the public sector.
Just on that, you just made me think of something, a couple of other examples. Effectively, so what lots of video games have now is a replay viewer. So you can replay your game or someone else's game. It runs it through the same video game engine, but not in a way that's interactive. Well, it's interactive in the sense that you can change your perspective. You can see what was happening in the game at that time. And two other real-world examples, when you think about naval logs of naval warfare, there's extensive logs. People can, military historians can recreate the battle, what decisions were made, when, and what was happening. And then we've spoken already about aviation black boxes. Effectively, they can replay what happened, both the cockpit voice recorder and all of the control inputs, all the sensors and everything on the plane. It seems to me that what should be demanded, what I'm thinking that we need, and I don't know if this exists, this is my question, is effectively a replay viewer like that for the data from the autonomous vehicle. Just having, here's the 15 gigabytes of data that represent the last 2 minutes of this journey, that's not useful. What's useful is having a replay engine that will allow you to effectively reproduce that journey from the point of view of the car. Here are the things that are identified. This is, it didn't identify, it didn't put the little box around that dog that ran out, which actually was then what caused the accident. And it seems to me the only people who could produce that kind of thing would be the manufacturer. So does that exist anywhere, and is anybody asking for it?
The companies have that information.
But do they make it? Well, I'm sure they
don't. They don't make it available at present.
So making that available.
So what I'm arguing for is for a standardised mechanism by which companies can provide something like that. And the salient example here is the first automated vehicle fatality that occurred, which was Elaine Herzberg in the US. The vehicle couldn't decipher what that person was. It was a person pushing a bike across the street. The vehicle couldn't decide whether they were a person, a bicycle, another vehicle, and then there was a crash where the person lost their life. If a regulator had known about the kind of instability of the perception of that vehicle in terms of pedestrians, they might have had different thoughts about whether it was acceptable for that vehicle to be operating on public streets. And so being able to come to those conclusions about whether the vehicles are behaving in a way that is acceptable using a data-led approach, I think is necessary.
Jack. One caveat on that. So where those crashes, and there have been very few of them that have been properly investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board in the US, who have very rapidly acquired expertise in this area. And one of their concerns in their reports on that crash and a couple of the others involving Teslas have been that even if the companies share data, it's sometimes uninterpretable. So some of you will know it's a sort of feature of a lot of these AI systems, especially deep learning systems, that we can know what they did, but we can't know why they did it, right? And there's a serious set of technical questions here, and which isn't to say that we shouldn't make these demands on the technology companies in order to be able to retrace their steps and actually say why their computer vision system made the decision that it did.
Go ahead.
Of course, the focus, rightly, in terms of safety would be on collision investigation in terms of this line of discussion. But I come back to my earlier point. To some extent, and Nick's made a comment earlier, we shouldn't be expecting more of these autonomous services. But nevertheless, even if they were able to run entirely safely, they are a huge opportunity from a data-rich world of Silicon Valley to be able to answer other questions that affect the street scene and the urban environment in London. And whether that's part of almost a negotiation in the sense of, well, yes, you can come into our city, but we need something in return which is over and above operating safe ride-hailed vehicles. Again, I would come back to what would be the questions from the Mayor's Vision's point of view and the improvement that's being sought that reasonably could be answered by these high data-rich environments that these vehicles are both creating and moving through that could be of value. And whether or not that's happened at all in any of the US or, for that matter, Chinese cities where we have robotaxis, I don't know, whether other panellists do.
Thomas, I think you were going to come in.
Can I just re-emphasise Jack's earlier point around the privatisation of this data and the necessity for a culture that's far more akin to aviation, which will not happen. The companies will not do that. Companies almost never do that. I mean, aviation might be one example where companies did to a certain degree. We have a very safe railway now, but for most of the 19th century, the train companies tried to avoid pretty much every safety feature that was encouraged of them until over 100 school kids were killed in Enniskillen before finally Parliament stepped in to take action. So I actually think these vehicles probably will be reasonably safe, but it certainly won't be as a result of a safety culture from the operators, because that never happens, and it doesn't feel like we have got the necessary statutory regime in place at the moment, and there is probably too much trust. The other thing I'd just quickly mention is the China question. I am not a geopolitical expert, so I have no idea whether we should worry, but I know that a lot of telecoms people were a tad grumpy when we fitted out loads of Huawei kit, and then after we fitted it, decided we shouldn't have done and had to unfit it all again. If you look at what these vehicles do, they are constantly monitoring absolutely everything they see, and they will be going almost everywhere if we license them for the whole of London. Ruter in Oslo, actually, again, recently disassembled one of their Yutong Chinese buses and found a kill switch that could disable the bus remotely. No evidence it had ever been used, no evidence there was any nefarious purpose, but it was there. All Chinese companies have a duty to cooperate with the Communist Party on request. Therefore, I can't comment whether or not it's a good idea for Chinese-owned vehicles to be monitoring everything that happens in London, but it would be a good idea for us to decide that before we become dependent on them.
Yeah, well, that was my next question, actually. So we've spoken about the sort of transport-related data, and I hinted at it earlier, but there's obviously this question of personal data that they're collecting. Exactly as you say, this is a sort of, moving CCTV festival. And who has access to that data? What's done with it? Is it even stored? If we look at something like the police live facial recognition technology, explicitly designed to discard any photos that aren't used. If you walk past, you're not on their wanted list, your photo is immediately discarded. That's regulatory requirement. It's not here. Are there any regulations about that elsewhere? Are there good practices, or is this just vast amounts of facial recognition data, for example, just going somewhere and who knows where?
I don't know. I'm afraid I don't know. In the last few years, a few years back, we did a report for the Government Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation on responsible innovation for self-driving vehicles, and privacy was one of the areas that we were asked to look at, where some companies were talking about anonymity by design within their computer vision systems. I think at the time there was some insistence among some of the tech people where they would say, well, it's sometimes useful to see what's happening on somebody's face because it helps prediction in terms of are they about to cross the road or not, for example. So you're likely to see some trade-offs between safety and privacy. But as far as I know, there's no top-down rules on that stuff.
Okay. Has this come up in any other regulatory environment? I mean, I can't imagine we're the first people to think of it. Is anybody?
Well, there's the debate about live facial recognition in London that I think is the obvious place to be looking for concerns about it.
Yeah, no, I specifically meant in terms of the personal data collected by robo-taxis or autonomous vehicles of any kind, obviously the Tesla ones or whatever. Is there anything we can look at that's gone on elsewhere that any of you are aware of that we can look at as either good practice or bad practice that we could learn from?
I mean, I think in general, we have to remember that these really have only been deployed at any scale in the US and China, and they are both very different and distinctive environments. And quite consistently, both operators of both of those countries have seen London as one of their first launch markets elsewhere, and that is what they have done. Therefore, if we want a distinctive approach that is not China or the US, then we can't look elsewhere. We've got to create it.
Okay, I think my other question was really about privacy for the people in the vehicle, and I think we sort of covered that earlier. So I think that's it, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we now go to Assemblymember Baker.
Thanks. Yeah, I've got a few sort of follow-uppy questions on the area that we've been discussing that have leapt out. One of which is it's very concerning, this idea that the data-rich nature of the transport it means that the operators may not understand why a safety incident has occurred, and that's not new, because we have that in other platform operators, not necessarily in safety, but decisions are being made by the algorithms that actually the companies don't understand, that affect transport and affect service and stuff like that. This might be a stupid question, but is there a demand for us and the companies that they do understand what their vehicles are doing? Is that, I mean, it seems obvious to us, but is that a demand that can be made in terms of the level of tech and data that they're using?
For me, I think it's a demand that they should expect, because the conversations with the public is they expect that these vehicles the companies understand why they're behaving as they do, and I would be careful as well about presentations that indicate that there is an understanding of what the vehicles are doing, which isn't actually true. So just because you have a description that is added that says, I'm waiting for the red light because I can see the light is red, that's not necessarily precisely why the vehicle has stopped. And so there's a divergence between what the output of this sort of language system might be compared to what the vehicle was actually seeing and using to determine its actions. That's why I think we need to get to that precise data that is determining how the vehicle behaves, and I think it's reasonable to ask for that in a standardised format.
Thanks. Thank you. Is anyone else on that point?
I would just say, so some of the approaches, some of the technological approaches in this area will be more explainable than others, and some companies are going to find it harder to answer that explainability question than others.
Yeah. They don't necessarily need to explain it to me, but they need to explain it to somebody.
So I would say
Transport for London, for instance.
That becomes a really important question, right? It's not just explaining it to their own satisfaction, maybe as computer scientists. It's about who needs to, is it explaining it to the police, explaining it to a judge, explaining it to the members of the public, which might be very, very different requirements.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And related to that, we already have, and this is about personal data, we already, again, as I say, have platform operators like ride-hailing using personal data in ways that then affect the accessibility of transport. There's been examples of like how long it takes you to get to an Uber might affect whether you get an Uber in the future and things like that. And again, in some cases, I think they don't fully understand how that's working. Are there any ways that, again, that data can be shared and we can control that in a way that means these services are being used for the people who really need it and in the places that really need it? Does that make sense? Yeah? I don't know whether there's an answer.
So I mean, my simple response would be that that's probably not an automation issue, and I would hope that TfL have more experience, having dealt with Uber and other ride-hail companies, on the opportunities and risks of those sorts of algorithmic approaches that we might learn to apply to robotaxis. Similarly, if we are able to construct a regime for robotaxis that does actually serve the public interest a bit better, that might be useful in how we deal with ride-hail companies in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure we can ask TfL that at some point. We've talked a lot about sharing safety data and how that might be done, and well, we're not quite sure exactly on what format, but there does need to be a way of sharing that safety data. If we're going to construct a regime that allows these services to be complementary to the other forms of transport that we need in London, what sort of data should we be requiring from the operators? And I put this under a general heading of journey data. What sort of information, and are there any good models where that's a sort of healthy relationship between the Transport Authority and a private operator?
I mean, there's two separate things there. The first is, we don't need to make the assumption that we're starting with there's an operator, it's their service, and they are sharing data with us. It can be, we have a service, we are going to procure an operator to deliver our service, and we are going to share data with them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that way round. If there is going to be data shared, it depends what the asks of the operator are going to be in terms of the outcomes we're asking them to deliver. So if you look at, for example, TfL's e-scooter trial, which is probably the nearest equivalent at the moment, there's various bits of data that the e-scooter operators are asked to share to validate that they are delivering the specification that's been agreed with TfL. In this case, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's around the fundamental safety of the proposition, which doesn't really apply from a London perspective. It's things like Jack said earlier around transparency of safety data for the purpose of making the technology safer and taking a different cultural approach. But if we're saying that this needs to be accessible, this needs to be connected to an integrated transport network with credits offered if you end a ride in a certain location, we need to be able to validate that has taken place, etc. That's but as I say, I'd kind of rather we started with defining what it is that we want and then define how it is that we measure that, as opposed to saying we're starting with the robotaxi proposition as deployed in Phoenix and then San Francisco. Oh, what data do we need to validate that? Well, that wasn't designed around London's transport needs.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Maybe I'm just being a little bit cynical about it. Thanks.
What strikes me as intriguing here is that we have a national position of now inviting forward volunteers to be part of these experiments on the basis of experimenting whether machines can go from A to B without harming humans. We're not inviting experiments about whether it can address congestion, whether it can improve our understanding of the multimodal mix of transport in an urban area. And, of course, the headlines just yesterday were very much about Uber expecting that so long as London plays its part and presses the yes button in the next couple of months, we'll be up and running, and that will be great for Heidi Alexander, and won't it look wonderful for the UK being world leading? But what this conversation highlights is if you're looking from the point of view of the Mayor's vision and transport strategy, there's a whole series of quite difficult questions to bottom out before you would reach a point of saying, we are ready to have a more holistic engagement on this to address multiple policy areas. And I think that could be quite a difficult position we find ourselves in very shortly.
Thanks. Thank you.
And I think that sort of slight credulousness of central government that this is automatically a good thing is a significant concern. When the DfT put out a press release announcing one of the robotaxi launches earlier this year, they included a figure that this has an economic value to the UK of 42 billion. And I looked at that and thought, that makes no sense. I cannot imagine where that number came from. And I did a LinkedIn post making that point. And Tim Sitrichik, the AV expert, very kindly decided to do some digging and find out where that 42 billion figure came from. And it's a pre-pandemic number based on us having an AV manufacturing sector. Nothing to do with robotaxi deployments at all. That 42 billion figure was on the press release, it was on the BBC, it has been used repeatedly, and it is a different number from a different time for a different purpose. So we've got to be really clear about what it is we want to achieve.
Thanks very much. And we're just going to follow up on the economic thing from another Assembly member. But I just want to, and I don't think anyone else has got anything to say about this because we briefly touched upon it, but I just want to ask the question in case we have missed anything. In terms of the susceptibility of autonomous of robotaxis to cyber attacks, and are there any steps that you're aware of that we should be taking now to minimise London's vulnerability? If you don't have anything additional to add, we'll find someone else, I'm sure. So.
Could I just say?
Yeah, sure.
So I think cyber is one of these areas where we might reassure ourselves, as Thomas has done, that the technology is relatively safe. Right, the category of risks from this technology are not going to be the same as the category of risks from human drivers, and cyber is going to be one of those.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm choking to.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to go back to something, Thomas, you were saying about thinking about, what is the service that London needs, and you were saying, we've got to create that. What do you think the steps are to actually, we've had mention of outer London, places where there are public transport deserts, where people are much, much more likely to feel forced to use a car to be able to just do their basic everyday journeys because the options just are not there in terms of public transport. And we've had some of the outer London Assembly members in other meetings have been very, very clear about, the why driving private cars is such a thing so much more of a thing in outer London, because it is just the most convenient way that people find to achieve their journeys. So are you suggesting that actually if TfL were leading on this, that actually we should be really looking at models for different kinds of public transport options and then procure services from these autonomous vehicle companies, but actually TfL taking the lead in terms of stating what London's needs are in terms of meeting the transport strategy objectives?
Yes, absolutely. There's a whole bunch of transport challenges in London, and the question then becomes, does the advent of this technology potentially create the opportunity to address some of those? So we talked about outer London, which is by far, to me, the biggest. It depends on the cost of this coming down significantly. That may or may not happen. That gives us some time to work through what the proposition would look like. But that could be genuinely transformative to connectivity and therefore the economic potential of outer London and the quality of life of people in outer London. At the other extreme, there was a proposal a number of years ago to put an AV shuttle across Hammersmith Bridge as something that's actually lightweight enough to be able to cross with almost no modifications to the existing structure. So what are the list of transport problems that we face? Make that list. Which of those does AV have the potential to address? And what is the proposition that addresses it? And then it might be that some of those are addressed by a licence condition as a response to a robotaxi application, in which case, cool, fantastic, go for that. But it might be that others, if you need a high level of integration with the existing network, it might be that actually the right solution is to reverse that. I mean, it's no different to, we procure the bus network very intensively and have a very specific series of regulations around buses that are highly bespoke to that form factor. Whereas for river services, we license and we say we're going to provide some infrastructure in the form of piers, and then we're going to license those services, and we're going to leave the operators to define them within conditions, through to private hire, where we are relatively hands-off. Which the range of options should be exactly the same in this case. And just because it's a new technology doesn't mean that the toolkit has changed or the problem that we're trying to solve has changed.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. We are now moving on to our final section, which is economic impact. And we go to Assemblymember Bakari.
Thank you. So we've been touching on this, but we were referring just earlier about the government putting somebody else's phrase, a gun to our head, to make sure that AVs are incorporated. And you can see why, because there is evidence to say that there could be an economic impact, a benefit of 66 billion and 342,000 jobs being created. Can anyone give me some detail of how that impact is going to happen and where those jobs are going to come from?
well, your 66 billion is bigger than my 42 billion, but it's probably every bit as nonsensical. I mean, these numbers, if the 66 billion is calculated in the same way as the 42 billion, then it doesn't exist, and it's nonsense. It's a nonsense number. Just because a number exists doesn't make it true. It can be nonsense. A lot of these numbers are nonsense. There is a huge potential economic upside. We know that transport connectivity and access to opportunity is one of the single biggest drivers of economic growth. If you look at the United Kingdom, London is the only place in the UK that achieves benchmark productivity levels compared to a city of its size in Europe, and it is the only one with a high-quality integrated public transport network. Every other city in Europe, in Britain, falls behind, and those all have far less high-quality integrated public transport networks compared to their peers in the rest of Europe. If you trace the productivity map of London, it almost is it almost follows the tube map, where people can go to places and access opportunity. You see economic benefit. So the economic benefit is very real, but the economic benefit falls out of: is this a new way for people to access opportunity? And that's the exam question that we need to be answering. At the moment, we can be pretty confident the answer is no, because at the moment, AV...
No to the economic impact?
Yeah, because AV robo-taxis at the moment are the same proposition as Uber at the same price point as Uber. Therefore, it will have no significant impact beyond that already being provided by Uber. So right now, the economic impact is zero. But we've got time while the cost potentially falls to work out, is this a way in which people can access significant opportunity that they can't currently access? If so, what's the proposition and what do we need to do to make it happen? But that's where the economic benefit comes from.
What about the job increases? Where's that coming from? Does anyone know? I mean, I suppose it's technology, isn't it? AI jobs.
I can say a bit. So that would certainly be one of government's hopes is that by encouraging innovation in this area, you would enable high-value jobs in the UK. That looks really complicated in a world in which the largest company by far is an American company, where almost all of those high-value jobs are in the US. Waymo do have a base in the UK. I think what we're seeing is a weird paradox where the story of an inevitable robo-taxi influx, right, is not where the economic opportunities are. I think there probably are some long-term economic opportunities, but they would involve the steering of the technology in ways that better suit London and better suit the UK, right? So we are likely to see the technology look very different in 10, 20, 30 years' time. We're likely to see economic opportunities that at the moment aren't predictable. But at the moment, it looks like most of the economic benefits are going to American tech companies, or indeed Chinese
not here,
tech companies.
not Britain, not London.
Doesn't seem so.
No. Nick.
Well, at scale, there will be jobs in the maintenance and support of those vehicles. So making sure they're ready for deployment, making sure they are serviced appropriately, and then in the remote assistance as well, so that there are local support agents who can provide that service. And then, AI jobs potentially as well, but predominantly those would, there will be some domestic capability in that area, but predominantly they will stay in the centres, the home markets of those developers.
The fundamental economic opportunity is going to come, in my opinion, from answering the question, can someone live in a low-cost home in Havering and work for a tech startup in Hatfield? And at the answer, our transport network says, no, you cannot do that, which is why outer London does not have the economic potential of inner London, and why London's economic growth will increasingly be constrained. We don't have a transport solution to the question of how can someone live in a low-cost home in Havering and live in a tech startup in Hatfield at the moment. A robotaxi, as currently on offer, is not going to be that answer. Can this technology form part of that answer? That's the question.
Yeah, Glenn.
I know you perhaps started out by looking for some clear-cut answers, and I think Thomas has very well highlighted the lure of false precision. The more significant figures, the more confident you can be that it's a meaningless number. But I think also there's a danger of the all else being equal assumption in this. We're in a world that's rapidly changing, not least because of AI more broadly. The types of jobs and economic opportunities that will be available to be connected to through either mobility or accessibility are changing rapidly, which makes it almost impossible to have a meaningful number. Obviously, there'll be statistics specific to London, but just to give you some figures for England, over about the last 20 years, the number of commute trips per capita on average has gone down by a third. The number of business trips per capita has gone down by about a similar amount. Shopping trips are down by about a quarter. Those are huge changes in the way that we as a society are leading our lives, which of course have both social and economic implications. So when we talk about connecting opportunities to people, the opportunities are changing and people's own aspirations personally, as well as obviously their geographic locational choices, are changing.
Yeah.
I appreciate that means you shouldn't simply leave it at, well, we don't know what the economic implications are, but yes, be very guarded
Still
about
lots of question marks then. I mean, I'm interested in also the skill part of this as well. So as I said earlier, I went and actually experienced the AV at Wave, and I talked to, there was somebody actually sitting at the wheel, not touching the wheel. And their job was actually a chauffeur before they drive for a living. And I was wondering about what was going to happen to their future. And I think what's interesting that there could be a shift of the job role. And I think that's what Steve McNamara has been saying in his taxi magazine. Because I've been saying, we're going to be seeing a threat to the black taxi trade, but he's written articles to say actually there'll be a shift of those skills going to a different part. So his argument is in San Francisco, the shift has meant that there's a 1-to-1 ratio of radio controllers working with kind of remote control kind of approach. I mean, you're shaking your head. So I'm interested in that. Is that should we be just thinking about shifting the skills, and that is the way forward, not to worry? I mean, I know that my assembly member is going to be talking about job losses, but should we not worry about job losses? Or
I think it'll be gradual. I don't think there's a threat to black cabs because of they're already a premium service, and they have advantages that private hire doesn't have, which the robo-taxis won't have either. I think the change will be more in the private hire market, and that will be where there'll be a reduction in provision from human-driven vehicles rather than black cabs.
I know my chair's looking at me going, you're going into job losses. So I will stop there. But yeah, I mean,
okay, I'm going to bring
maybe you could extend that when you go to the next assembly member. But thank you. Yeah. I saw the
Assembly Member Turrell.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up from where Assemblymember Carvey was, what interventions could be put in place to safeguard private hire and black cab jobs and incomes? Whoever wants to start.
Oh, this is complex, isn't it? We're into the lump of labour fallacy, where it's assumed that the jobs that exist now are the jobs that exist, but of course we don't know what jobs will exist. So, clearly it is possible that very large number of private hire jobs will cease to exist. That is by no means certain. It is possible. I agree with Nick. Black cab jobs, I think, it's a completely different proposition for multiple reasons. So I'm less worried there. It is clearly possible that multiple private hire jobs will cease to exist. Now that only happens if this becomes a much lower cost proposition, because at the moment it's a relatively premium service. It won't attract significant scale. There's not actually a massive economic case to deploy it at large scale. If it does become a much lower cost proposition, and we've got the regulation right, then it is starting to have those transformative economic effects that we were expecting and we were talking about, in which case the person who lives in their home in Havering and was previously driving a PHV can now go and get a whole bunch of other jobs in London doing other things that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do, and you have a whole new wave of job generation that we can't predict, and it's really difficult. I always think about my granddad, who would be staggered to know that there are more people who are now employed to draw leaves on coffee than to mine coal in this country, because that job did not exist when he was a kid. It's really hard to predict the future of the economy, and therefore it's much easier to say that we need to protect jobs that exist. I think, for me, it all comes down to if the cost of this proposition falls significantly, it will have major transformative implications, which can be positive or negative according to what regulations we put in place and how well we design the outcomes we're trying to achieve. But those will then potentially generate a whole bunch of new jobs and new economic activity in London, or it won't, in which case it'll probably just end up being a bit of a nuisance, and a nuisance that we can try to avoid.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Just a supplementary, since Thomas has mentioned coal mining. I think one wouldn't say, well, we need to protect coal mining jobs. We must continue to have, dirty fossil fuel-based energy reliance in the UK. And if one were, my understanding is, I have to be corrected, that notwithstanding what's been said about PHVs and their drivers, the black cab population has been more gracefully scaling down. I don't know whether that's correct. My concern would be if we see jobs disappear that for some reason we discover in the medium-term future we need to have back, because this experiment really has been quite an awful mess, and it wasn't inexorably and obviously heading in a particular direction. So, the capabilities and skill sets that particularly black cab drivers have, if we go fast forward past PHV drivers no longer existing to start questioning whether black cabs will still exist, that may be the natural course of events, as Thomas has said, in terms of a changing economy and set of job roles. But if for any reason we're losing skill sets which we discover later need to be recovered, that would be the area of concern for me.
Could I just add one thing? So I think often we have a discussion about the quantity of jobs, which is weirdly a discussion that tech companies quite often want us to have because they want to appear successful and disruptive. My guess is that if you're a driver in London, the big changes have been to the quality of work rather than the quantity necessarily. And I definitely don't do predictions, but my guess is that what Uber has done to driving work in London is going to be orders of magnitude more disruptive than what robo-taxis will do. But what I would, and there the change is not just to numbers, it's also to the quality of work. How in control of your earning are you? How dependent are you on faceless algorithms? Those sorts of things, which become far more important than just questions of numbers of workers.
Yeah, thank you. For those, I do think it's important to know, obviously, with the black cab trade in particular, there's the cultural impact they have on London, but also worth noting the amount of work they do kind of outside of it. For example, taking the veterans to war memorials, and for the work they do with taking sick children to Disneyland and places. I think all that will be lost if their jobs disappear in this point of technology. So I don't think it's about preserving jobs for the sake of preserving jobs. I think it's the actual culture and community impact that some of these jobs have on London and its identity. So leading on to that, what modelling has been done to understand the potential displacement of jobs in the taxi and private hire sectors, and what do these projections suggest?
We can see the effects that have taken place in US cities, and again it's that migration of private hire, of rideshare, that have shifted onto robotaxi. But they're very different cities. They don't have the same level of public transport infrastructure that we have. They don't have the kind of iconic black cabs that we have. And I think that comes down to, I think the point that's come across from all of us today is like, we should be setting out how we want the city to behave, and then seeing how this new technology can help us achieve those outcomes, rather than taking what we're given.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to come in on that? Nope. In that case, I'll stick with you then, Nick, for my final question on this, which is based on that then, do you think there's a case for limiting or phasing the number of autonomous vehicles introduced onto London roads while the wider economic impacts on jobs is still being addressed?
Yes.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks. And just briefly on the same subject, one of the problems that we have in terms of the volume of jobs in private hire particularly, but in driving generally, I know we're talking about robo-taxis today, is that it provides a particular group of workers work to do, basically. And if that starts to disappear, that's an economic problem. But because they are not directly employed, then the engagement both with the company that's coming along that may be providing the service in a different way and the companies that are currently providing the service that gives them the money, it's very, very complicated in terms of them then having a direct voice in how that transition works, or at the moment it looks like that. Do you have any thoughts about where that engagement could be? Because, of course, Transport for London as the transport authority and DFT, you know, they're looking at the transport impacts or the economic impacts. But here we have this, you know, group of workers, and it's a little bit difficult exactly when they're going to have their say. Have you got any views on that? Thanks.
I guess just from a research perspective, again, back to a remark I made earlier, forget for a moment robo-taxis. To what extent should we be asking existing PHV drivers why they found themselves moving into having that job? What were their circumstances previously? And indeed, what would they do? Of course, it's hypothetical, if their jobs were erased by robo-taxis. It seems to me we've got the population there to ask that are most affected. And if, you know, there's no reason why by Waymo or Uber are going to ask those questions of them. But certainly we should, I think, as a public authority.
Thanks.
I always think we have to be very careful about seeing the purpose of transport as to give people jobs. The purpose of transport, to a very significant degree, is to take people to jobs. PHV it's only about 14 years ago that the huge increase in PHV drivers driven by Uber was seen as a problem. And we were trying to work out how to deal with all these new PHV drivers and the threat they were opposing to the black cab trade. And now we're saying, well, PHV drivers need to be protected against the next thing. You know, we live in a city of 10 million people with a thriving, churning economy, and the economy changes the jobs that it provides. Far too many parts of the public transport sector end up seeing itself as there to provide jobs. The whole focus needs to be how can we best connect people to opportunity, and what people do we need to do that?
Of course, those people are Londoners using transport as well. And from our point of view, this is all part of what makes London work. So, just saying there will be other opportunities without taking that responsibility as people who currently provide transport, I think would be a problem for us. But, obviously, yes, we do need to work that transport work, but we can't then say these 100,000 people who have been getting people around, sorry, everything's changed, so... and you're cut out of the conversation. Apologies, but I take your point, but we've got to look at that in a much wider way. So, wanted to hear your views on whether that could be done practically.
I understand that point, but I do think that transport is a catalyst, one of the number one catalysts for generating jobs. Now, the trouble is, I can't tell you which jobs will be generated because that is absolutely impossible as a prediction exercise. But if we collectively, you, me, TfL, the Mayor, if we collectively get this right and define and come up with the outcome proposition that increases connectivity, especially in outer London, then there will be new jobs. I don't know what they are. You don't know what they are. We can get this very wrong, and we can end up with no PHV drivers, no new jobs, and in London that's entirely congested with zero occupancy vehicles. That's a really bad outcome. Let's not do that. But we have the opportunity to get this right. The trouble with that is it's very hard to define what the enormous increase in potential that could be will generate in terms of, that person will work in that space. But if a very significant part of our focus is on protecting every job that currently exists, it makes it very hard ever to create anything new and different. Every tube train once had a guard. They don't now. I don't think anyone is seriously
I'm not sure anyone's making that
no, they're not.
Argument.
But of course, there was a whole debate then about whether the move away from guards on tube trains was reasonable, was safe, whether that was a legitimate thing to do from an employment perspective. We now wouldn't go back. And as I say, the PHV sector is one that is actually in itself one that was considered to be an employment problem comparatively recently. So I'm not saying it's not something to consider, just that the number one purpose of transport is actually in job generation in the economy, not job generation in transport.
Thank you. So the only constant is change, and the reality is, as you said, obviously, is that we'll be in a very different jobs market, perhaps in a decade or 2 decades' time. Given that current PHV drivers have to have a licence, have to apply for that, and there's question marks over sort of limiting that and so on, but these new vehicles will come in and effectively replace them. Should we have an obligation on a new licence that gets allocated to these new vehicles, that there should be a contribution towards a retraining fund?
Seeing as there's silence on the panel, I'll answer. I personally don't think that's the most appropriate use of all of the various asks you're going to be making. I think there are lots of asks that, as we've established them so far, you should be making. But I think Nick's point earlier is important. If there is a reduction in PHV, it will be very gradual. This is not going to be a sudden jobs apocalypse. At the moment, there is not an economic case for a mass-scale adoption of robotaxi because the technology is still expensive. They're going to be incredibly cautious about rolling out in London just because of the enormous geographic differences between this city and the cities that they are used to. That doesn't mean that we aren't going to gradually walk ourselves into a position where we have something deeply unhelpful to the way the city works. So we should take it seriously. But we actually have more time to think than we think because there's time for them to work. They need to work through how to make them work here, and the cost needs to fall before it becomes transformative, either transformatively good or transformatively bad. During that time, a lot of PHV drivers will naturally churn anyway. So I think it's not as big a threat as it would seem from, oh my lord, by this time next year, no one's going to be working in PHV. We're all quite cautious about making predictions, but I will predict that by this time next year, there will be no material change in the number of people working in PHV.
I'd agree that we shouldn't buy into the hype of the industry that suggests that this will be a massive and quick disruption to London's transport system. However, I think one of the things that policymakers can really usefully do is set out things that we would want to watch for as the experiment unfolds. Right? Some of those things are likely to be about safety. Some of them are likely to be about location and where journeys are happening. Some of them are likely to be about substitution for different modes of transport. Some of them are likely to be about jobs. Right? So setting in place a set of things to watch for, early warnings and mechanisms, a sort of observatory for those things as the experiment plays out, I think would be a very wise move.
I don't want to sound glib at this point, but it feels as though we're coming full circle back to safety. I might say, hypothetically, to these 100,000 drivers, you do understand the reason principally that your jobs are being removed is because you can't drive without human error safely enough on London streets. And were you to be part of a safe systems approach whereby through speed limits and different approaches to driver behaviour, you may still have within your gift the opportunity to eradicate the need for the robot cars to come to London if you can assure the Mayor's transport strategy that London streets will be safer under your watch. Now, I appreciate it's slightly glib, but since we started with safety as the sort of myopic focus, it's because of those existing drivers, one assumes, that we now have the white charger coming over the hill to say we can make this better for you.
I mean, I don't think anybody's ever said that's the reason why they're going to be introducing these things, and it's certainly not an assertion that's been levelled at current drivers. So, Nick, did you want to say anything else on this one? No? Okay, well, thank you for your feedback on that.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for all your contributions. And I think one of the things that we'll take away very loud and clear is the need for TfL to think really seriously about what purpose they can put this technology to that will help them to meet the objectives of the Mayor's transport strategy, and in particular the opportunities in Outer London clearly need to be really looked at in some detail. So I just want to thank all of you for your contributions. If you could just remain seated just for a moment while I read through some final little tiny bits of remaining business. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can I ask the committee to note its work programme and meeting dates as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 11th of May 2026? The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 24th of June 2026 at 10 a.m. here in the chamber at City Hall. And there is no urgent business, so thank you. The meeting is now closed.